Alright, in this video we're going to talk about the ecological succession in the environment, as well as little microhabitats that are around within the environment. So, first off, kind of talking about what we're covering here. So, we're going to describe the different environments, like I said, support different varieties of organisms, different species and stuff like that. We're going to talk about the biodiversity and what it does to contribute to the sustainability of the ecosystem. And then we're just going to kind of talk about what ecological succession is, what it does, and what the process is. So, first off, what you got is what's called a climax community. Now, it's going to be your stable group that you have of plants, animals, flora and fauna if you want. And it's kind of the end result, what you were going for the whole thing. It's the end of your succession process, okay? So it's kind of like, you're done, this is what you wanted, we're all done here. Everybody's happy. So, kind of a rough view that you've got here is, you'll go from no plant life, no animal life. You'll start with your pioneer species. You'll get into your growth as you go, your smaller plants. Then you get into your shrubberies, different stuff, and then by the end you would have your full forest, your full ecosystem if you want, your whole little biodiversity, microhabitat or habitats that you got. Now, like I said, that's kind of what the end of the climax community is. Now, your equilibrium, that's where everything within the environment works. It's all balanced. This influences this does this, but it all kind of just flows as you go through. Same thing, you kind of have different things. You may have deforestation, which they cut it back to make room for other things, such as farmland. You also may have it because they're building towns, cities, and all that. You have what's called afforestation, which is where they go in, they plant trees. You may drive down the road, you see rows of trees and all that someone has went in and planted trying to get trees back planted. They don't grow in rows like that. That's because people have went in and planted them as they go through. Sometimes you may convert. You may go from this to upgrade down to this. Sometimes it may go kind of the opposite. Usually it's this to this. You don't see where you're going major cities down or anything. You got different stuff that affect the things. You got fauna, which like I said is animals, including humans. We're animals. You have flora, which is your plants, vegetation, tree, anything like that. That your climate affects those. It affects, we can't live in certain conditions that other animals may be able to. That animal may not be able to live in another one. As you go through, like I said, you have intact stuff, intact forests, ecosystems that are going to be ideal locations for certain animals or organisms, but they're not for others. Now, your pioneer species that I talked about on the first stage before. What that is that's your organism that is the first to arrive there. It's the first that's able to grow there. You're not going to have a barren rock environment that is going to be a habitat for stuff. That's not going to be able to have sustainability as far as what they've got. Now, what the pioneer species is going to be your mosses that you'll see that grow in places, your lichens, I may have pronounced that wrong, but lichens, lichens, you have the debate. Now, you also have your ferns, and then you also have just various weeds that don't require real in-depth root systems, so they're able to grow on this small stuff. Or not small stuff, sorry. Your rocks and stuff like that, to where they don't have to have long roots to be able to support themselves. They're able to grow on any of these surfaces. You may see a lot of moist areas to where like around creeks, rivers and stuff, the moss and stuff like that has grown on it. You may have the lichens growing on the trees because they don't require a whole lot. What these do is they're able to break these rocks down over time. Now, as they do that, they're going to arise up, and then you're going to have, like I said, they kind of form that symbiotic relationship. So they're going to grow off of this, and it supports it as well. Symbiotic relationships, you have different ones. You got parasitic relationships, which is where it kills the host. That is not this one. Symbiotic is where they both benefit from it. Now, like I said, your succession starts with the pioneer species. So succession is just your stages as you go, as I showed you 1 through 6. So as you're going through, it's the order process where the living community modifies to the physical environments and establishes an ecosystem where everything is going to flow. So right here, you may have like your annual plants. They're going to go and come back, go and come back. Then you have your perennials, which are multiple times a year they grow. Then your grasses start showing up. Your shrubberies start showing up. Your bigger, more evolved, that have more of a structure to them. Then you get your softwood trees, such as pine trees and stuff that come in. Then lastly, your hardwood trees will roll into the environment. Now, as it goes through, you're going to have each one is building off of the other until you get to the last. So your primary succession as you go through is your earliest phase. That's the beginning before you get onto anything else. So like I said, 0 years, that's going to be your rocks, your barren, and stuff like that. Then over time, now I don't mean 1 year, 2 years, stuff like that. This is going to take years, like I said. So you may have 300 plus years for an ecosystem to form around the stuff, because it's not going to be an overnight process to go from rocks to full forest. Now, your secondary succession is where it changes the kinds of plants and animals that live in a particular community over time. Once again, it's not going to be an overnight process. So, your secondary succession could possibly be, as we've talked about in earlier videos, you have a forest fire. Maybe a wildfire came through and burnt the stuff down, the forest and all that was there down. Well, when that burns down, the animals have to move, they migrate away and all that because there's no food there. So, over time, it's going to go through and the whole process kind of starts again. At 0 years, the forest is burnt down. You've seen pictures to where the whole forest is gone. Over time, your annual plants will slowly start coming back in. After a while, your grasses, weeds, perennials, stuff like that are going to come in. And then you get into your intermediate species. So the first two are your pioneers, the first things that show up. Kind of like your pioneers in history, that they're the ones that went exploring. These are kind of the same thing. They kind of get there before your others. Your intermediate species is where your small shrubs come. Your pines, your younger, smaller type trees. And then at the end, your climax community, that's going to be where your forest has come back. You may have the grass bed underneath. The soil and stuff has been able to support the structure of the bigger trees. At this point, you may get the animals will start coming back in these areas because what you need. So you may have your smaller forager type animals show up here, and then your larger predators and stuff come back here, because you're not going to have your predators showing back up before anything that they have they're going to be able to eat. You're going to have that over time. Now, like I said, your microhabitat is going to be a small or limited extent, which differs in character from surrounding more extensive. So you may have a big forest habitat, then you may have your small pond, which could be a microhabitat within it. Or you may have a larger area like a desert, but then you may have your microhabitat, maybe an oasis in the desert, which is differing from the surrounding animals or whatever. All your environments or your habitats, any of that, are made up of two parts. It's either biotic, which means at some point it was living, or abiotic, which is water, sunlight, rocks, metal, desk, whatever. It's just stuff that wasn't living. So it's non-organic type stuff as it goes through. Now, last thing we're talking about here is your levels of organism within the environment. So we're going to start off with organism and roll out through biosphere. That's going from the simplistic through the most that includes everything. Each one of these is included in the previous one, or the previous one is included in the next one. So organisms are part of the population, population is part of the community, community is part of the ecosystem, and the multiple ecosystems make up the biosphere. So, like I said, the organism is going to be your individual species. So, I would be an organism that was a human. So, I'm a human organism because I am the single individual of it. So, now, your population would be if we had a group. So, the classroom is going to be the population of that individual's species. So, you hear the human population or the flamingo population is on the decline or whatever. They're talking about all of that species as a whole is what they're talking about here. So an organism makes up the population. Now, your community is made up of all the populations of different species that live in that area. So as far as in the East Texas area, you could have communities of a bunch of animals. So if you live on the verge of the woods, your communities that make up where you live, you may have communities that involve squirrels, sparrows, foxes, coyotes, and just all the different animals, the different animal populations make up that community. From there, your community, all these animals that make up that ecosystem. So your ecosystem is going to be, if it's a forest, you may have your rainforest, which is all the animals and all the communities that make it up. So that single organism, all of that species, all of the other species that make up the rainforest are going to be part of that ecosystem. If you then go over to the desert, everything that makes up that desert is part of that ecosystem. It's all included. It's all one big running machine, if you want. So all those kind of rely on the other. If your predator doesn't have any prey, then it's going to end up dying out, or it's going to have to move and migrate to some other system. And then all of this makes up the biosphere. So basically, it contains the whole area of the earth where life exists. So you've got your whole biosphere. Now the biosphere includes your abiotic factors. So skyscrapers, your car, your house, all that stuff is still part of the biosphere. So just kind of an example of how this works. Here you would have your single species or the single organism that makes it up. If you have multiple of those, so right here you've got 3 of them, you're going to have the population. It's the population of that species. If that population dies out, that whole species dies out. Now, your community is going to be the different ones. So here you've got the 3 here, but you've also got birds in the background that make up other populations that are included. Now, once you get to the ecosystem, that's going to be everything that affects it. So your rain, the temperature, your climate, what animals are there, what plants are there, all this stuff factors into it. And then the biosphere is everything. That's basically the whole earth. So all this stuff, plus the factory over here in Russia, plus the stuff over here, all this stuff is going to be included in your biosphere. So all ecosystems and everything included as it goes through. So basically, that's kind of a quick rundown of ecological succession. You start with your primary succession, your ferns, mosses, stuff like that. That makes way for you to get to your climax community at the end as the end result. So that'll be it for this video.